The Golden Horde, the state of Joly. The collapse of the Golden Horde. When, about 750 years ago, the state of the Golden Horde arose in the vast expanses of Eurasia, it was called Ulu Ulus, or the state of Joly, named after Khan Jochi, the eldest son of Genghis Khan. The Golden Horde had existed for over 200 years. Hardly could anyone have imagined in that era the possible future fall of this powerful empire. But it did happen in 1483. This event significantly influenced the course of the entire human history. It was of such great importance that we shall dwell on this in more detail. What happened? What historical events and processes led to the collapse of the Mongolian state? This is what we will try to tell you in our program. The Golden Horde had reached its heyday in the middle of the 14th century, during the reign of Uzbek Khan, and then his son Jibek. At that time, construction and trade were rapidly developing in the Golden Horde. The country was experiencing an economic rise. Over the years, the Golden Horde had been an intersection of a wide variety of beliefs and religions. Islam was declared the state religion during the reign of Uzbek Khan. The rulers of the Golden Horde most often converted to Islam from the European preachers, who came from Central Asia, Bukhara, and Khorizm. Along with their religion, the preachers brought with them enlightenment. Mosques and schools were erected in the cities. The townspeople gave their children up to mentors and teachers. A system of Muslim institutions developed everywhere in the Golden Horde: mosques, madrasas, and mausoleums. But the slow pace of the way of life of the Golden Horde by the middle of the 14th century was disrupted by political and economic instability. The struggle for power between the numerous Khans' descendants intensified. A terrible plague epidemic was also added to the intertribal wars. The collapse of the Golden Horde, the plague. In 1346, a plague epidemic swept the Golden Horde, from Khorizm all the way to Crimea. Merchants, travelers, itinerant monks, and pilgrims became the main spreaders of this epidemic. The Black Death had devastated the Golden Horde. The population died by the thousands, and survivors left the cities. The movement of caravans along the Silk Road stopped. The causative agent of the plague is the plague bacillus. A person could die within 24 hours after contact with a sick person. 95% of people die after being infected with the plague. Plague epidemics are one of the worst episodes in human history. The plague of the 14th century originated in Central Asia. The primary foci of the pandemic emerged in China. The disease spread rapidly further. The pandemic covered the entire territory of the Golden Horde. The flea is the main carrier of the plague. Animals played a crucial role in the spread of the plague. For 3 years, the disease spread throughout the world. First, ports were infected, then cities, and then rural areas. The area of the spread of the disease soon assumed enormous proportions. The name of Mamai is widely known. How did it happen that the commander managed to become not only the actual ruler of the Golden Horde for 20 years, but also made it into world history with his activities? By origin, he could not be a Khan. Only Genghisites could occupy the throne. The Golden Horde, Han Berdebek, was killed as a result of the seizure of power. Mamai didn't stay away from these events. He unleashed a war against the new ruler. He became the head of the western part of the state, but he himself failed to ascend to the throne due to insufficient noble origin. He needed a compliant and feeble-minded Khan. Subsequently, Mamai nominated one or another Khan to be on the throne, whom he completely controlled. Mamai became famous for his successful campaigns against Russia. But at the very end of his life, he lost the great battle of Kulikovo, and a little later to Tokhtamış Khan, with whom he fought for power for a long time. His mistakes led to a diminishing of the influence of the Golden Horde, and his own death. The collapse of the Golden Horde. In 1359, Berdebek Khan, who was the son of Janibek Khan, was killed. The Khan did not leave an heir, and as a result, many claimants to the throne emerged. The process of dissolution of the Golden Horde began. More than 25 rulers took over in a period of only 20 years. This period of wars was called the Great Collapse. In 1380, Tokhtamış Khan won a final victory over the armies of Mamai. He managed to unite the lands of the Golden Horde for some time. In 1391, two huge armies met on the Kandurcha River, Emir Tamerlan and the Khan of the Golden Horde, Tokhtamış. Tens of thousands of soldiers took part in the battle on each side. In 1395, another battle took place between Tamerlan and Toktamish. Toktamish lost the battle. He fled and could no longer return to the throne. In the 1420s, the Golden Horde was divided, forming several independent khanates. The main successor was the Great Horde, which existed until the beginning of the 16th century. Kishi Muhammad was the last ruler of the Horde. After his death, the Golden Horde basically disappeared. Having consolidated his power, the Khan of the Golden Horde, Toktamish, entered into a struggle with his neighbor, the Central Asian ruler Tamerlan, his former ally. It is not known how the history of the Golden Horde would have developed further had Tamerlan not gone on a military campaign against the Mongol state. The military commander, Tamerlan, was also called Timur, the Iron Lammer. He was not a Chingizite, and officially could not bear the title of Khan. At first, he was called the Emir, which is a leader or a war chief. However, having married, he was able to intermarry with the house of the Chingizites. Tamerlan was tall, well-built, and developed physically. Soldiers described his strength, despite the fact that he was wounded by arrows in one battle. For the rest of his life, Timur was left lame on his right leg, and with a shrunken right hand. While most of the warriors could pull the bowstrings to the level of their collarbone, Timur could pull it up to his ear. This is how ancient authors wrote about him. Gathering an army, Tamerlan set out on military campaigns against the Golden Horde, and quickly seized vast territories of the Mongol state. Tamerlan knew roughly what to expect from Toktamish Khan. The tactics of the Chingizites had not changed for centuries. Tamerlan divided the army into mobile units. He left 2 as a reserve force, while his infantry entrenched itself covered with shields. The Khan of the Golden Horde, Toktamish, launched an attack from the flanks. His offensive blow was repulsed by the army of Tamerlan, having engaged the reserve units to the attack, rushed to the offensive. The troops of the Golden Horde retreated. Tamerlan rushed in pursuit. Toktamish's army was defeated, and its remaining parts crossed the Volga River. Tamerlan did not pursue them. After a series of clashes, Tamerlan dealt a devastating blow to the Golden Horde troops. Large cities were devastated. Toktamish lost the Khan's throne. This war hastened the fall of the Golden Horde, as its disintegration became inevitable. In the 1420s, the Golden Horde was divided into several independent khanates. At first, the Siberian Khanate was formed. It originated in western Siberia and existed for 130 years. The state structure was of a paramilitary nature. The population of the Khanate was small, about 50,000 people. The Khan was elected by the nobility, the Murzas, Beks, and Tarkhans. The most famous of the Siberian Khans was Kuchum Khan. The Khanate of Kazan, another successor of the Horde, was the kingdom of Kazan, the founder of which is believed to be Ulu Muhammad Khan. He seized Kazan and built a new capital. The main occupation of the population in the suburbs was agriculture. Handicraft trade was developed in that city. The heyday of the Khanate fell on the second half of the 15th century. The Nogai Horde. The Nogai Horde was the largest state remaining after the Golden Horde. At the origins of the horde was Khan Idigay, who defeated the Lithuanian ruler, Vitovd. The population of the horde was large, and the army numbered several tens of thousands of soldiers. By the 17th century, the horde had split into several small khanats. The Astrakhan Khanat. The Astrakhan Khanat turned out to be the smallest fragment of the Golden Horde, and was located at the mouth of the Volga River. Medieval Astrakhan became its center. The population was engaged in nomadic cattle breeding and trade. The Crimean Khanat. On the territory of the Crimean Peninsula, the adjacent steppe lands to the north, there was a state, though not too large in area, but powerful, having a highly developed culture. This Khanat lasted longer than the others and was called the Crimean Khanat. The Kazakh Khanat. The Kazakh Khanat became the successor of the Golden Horde. The Abulkhair Khan Khanat was formed on the territory of modern Kazakhstan. The stringent policy of the Khan led to the fact that part of the tribes were forced to migrate to the Mongolistan. These tribes were headed by the sultans Jibek and Kirei. They established an independent state entity, the Horde. This horde was known as the Kazakh Khanat. It experienced a turbulent history of falls and renewals, civil war, disintegration into separate Jus, and a new union. The state existed until the middle of the 19th century. The Golden Horde left its mark not only in history, but also in language. Surprisingly, we still use some of these words in our speech today. The word quarantine comes from the Latin 40 days, and has come down to our days since the Golden Horde times, when the plague was raging everywhere. This was the name of isolation of ships that arrived in the port cities of the Golden Horde. For 40 days, the crew were not able to leave the ship. This held back the spread of the dangerous disease. Berkut, from the Mongolian Birgid, or eagle, or golden eagle. There is one more outdated name for the golden eagle, Kalzan, which is translated from the Mongolian, meaning bald. The Russian word byk, or bull, comes from the Mongolian, bukye, a connection of the word bohe, which means strong, or strong man, is also possible. The Russian word gutalin is a shoe polish. It protects leather by imparting good moisture resistance. This word comes from the Mongolian gutal, which means shoes. The Russian word yeda, for food, means everything that is edible and that a person can eat. The Russian word yeda comes from the Mongolian idye. It is interesting, but this word also came to us from the Golden Horde period. The slope of a mountain or a hill in Russian is called a kosogor, or a slope. This word also has a Mongolian root and comes from the word hotgor, which means depression or low land. The Russian word ovyos, or oats, comes from the Mongolian ovs. It is known that initially oats were considered a weed crop, and that Altai is the center of its appearance, along with Europe and the Middle East. The word busi, or beads, is borrowed from the word of Mongolian bus, which translates as belt. The Russian word ustye, or river mouth, comes from the Mongolian ust, or aquatic, a place where there is water. Junta comes from the Mongolian word hun, or man. Junta translates as having people, or a place where there are people. Today this word has a negative meaning. Chelo is an Old Russian word. The Russian word lob, for forehead, comes from the Mongolian word shilye, which is the back of the head. Archaeologists, historians, and museum staff carefully study and anxiously preserve unique historical exhibits so that in 100 or 200 years, our descendants will be able to see the living, authentic testimonies, sharing the real life of the previous generations. Indeed, when you cross the threshold of a museum, you enter into the world of the past, which can bewitch and enchant. The main holdings of the Kazakh National Museum include authentic items used by people of the 13th and 14th centuries in the Golden Horde. They are all of cultural and historical value. An auxiliary scientific collection that has got dummies, models, casts, and reconstructions allows visitors to feel inspired with the distant era. The exhibits held in the collections of museums are classified primarily by materials: wood, metal, fabric, or leather. Museum staff combines exhibits into collections. A man-made object often has a longer lifespan than its creator. A thing begins to exist separately from its owner. It's amazing how an item can pass from one era to another. And if you stop carefully to examine the products that were made by the Golden Horde craftsmen, you involuntarily wonder how they could have made them so skillfully. What tools did they use, and what techniques did they own? How long did it take for an ancient craftsman to create this or that item? All these questions and many others are answered by the museum staff. Some items are unique and one of a kind. Such exhibits are called rare. These relics are especially protected. One of the main functions of the museum is to preserve the historical fund. For this, a specific environment is specially created. The required temperature, humidity, and lighting are maintained. Also, measures are constantly being taken to protect against pollution, biological and mechanical damage, and much more. Unfortunately, time destroys valuable items, and all these measures significantly inhibit the processes of the natural aging. Conservation professionals use various chemicals and physical agents to prolong life of exhibits for many centuries. Museums have workshops where scholars carry out restorations. They restore the appearance of damaged items. Without knowing the history, it will be difficult to imagine what the future holds. This makes it difficult to build it. Museums can rightfully be called a sort of chronicle. They are reliable keepers of historical memory and the heritage of past eras. A significant part of the Golden Horde is located on the territory of Kazakhstan. The Golden Horde is part of our national history. For more than 200 years, the Ulus of Jochi was a political and economic center, with which the entire Eurasian continent was reckoned with. Historical data, unambiguously and convincingly demonstrate that the era of the Golden Horde was one of the significant periods in the history of the Kazakh people.